running late. Is this thing working well? Okay, great. So my name is Jack. I work at the Web3 Foundation, and I'm here to talk to you today about Kusama and Polkadot. So a couple different directions this can go. How many of you guys are familiar with Polkadot? Any basic understanding? So like half the crowd. Okay, good. So some of it might be a recap for you guys then, and then I'll try to keep get a little bit more technical as the talk goes on. So I'm going to start out talking a little bit about where we are with Polkadot, the architecture, kind of a recap on that, kind of the philosophy and values behind the chain. Then I'm going to go into Kusama and some of the interesting and fun things going on there. So it's a small crowd. If you guys want to stop me mid-talk and ask a question, just feel free to do that. So we just launched a chain a couple months ago called Kusama Network. And Kusama Network is a very similar code base to that of Polkadot. It's a standalone chain. It has its own governance, has its own token. The token's live now, and there's people actively building on Kusama, which is really exciting. So Kusama, kind of the initial idea was, hey, let's create kind of an incentivized testnet, a test bed for applications, parachains to deploy on before they deployed on Polkadot. It allows us to test internally as well as external teams to test. So a lot of what we're doing with Polkadot is kind of first of its kind. The governance system, on-chain governance system is pretty powerful and ambitious in its architecture. It hasn't been tested before. The way we approach scaling through heterogeneous shards or different blockchains in the sharding architecture also is first of its kind. The messaging passing between shards is first of its kind. So all of these things will be tested in Kusama and aligned with network. So it was really Kusama's kind of first of its kind test in what we can do by creating another standalone network. So a little bit about the long and medium term plan for Kusama. Kusama initially will be bridged to Polkadot, just like Ethereum will be bridged, Bitcoin will be bridged. And then longer term, we believe that it might be a nested relay chain, which I'll go a little bit into the architecture of Polkadot version 2, which essentially means it's going to potentially share security with that of main Polkadot relay chain and other parachains. A couple other things about what we believe will start out as two very similar chains and evolve into very different use cases and different communities and like a different meme as well. So you can think of Polkadot more as a chain with higher security that enterprises or more companies with potentially more capital would deploy towards, because parachains cost DOT in terms of opportunity cost. So you got a bond DOT. And Kusama will be a little bit cheaper. So we believe companies that are maybe focusing on gambling or content or chains that will sacrifice the security guarantees for high throughput. So we're seeing some of those launch today, like local KSM projects and things like that.
Like gaming?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Exactly. So I'd also say related to Kusama. So I mentioned it's kind of the idea initially was an incentivized testnet. So where do the incentives come from? So the part of it is related to DOT. So 1% of DOT tokens are reserved for Kusama participants. So that's kind of a way we anticipate Kusama holders and participants being rewarded in, say, the next 6 to 12 months or so. Another one is kind of related to that nested relay chain architecture. So Polkadot's really interesting in that I mentioned the really powerful governance mechanism. So in these crypto economic systems, there is a block reward. And with Bitcoin, that all goes to security of the network, all goes to miners, right? But in some of these newer version chains, Polkadot included, you can actually decide where those inflationary rewards go. So maybe 5% we dedicate towards an ecosystem fund, or 10% goes towards maintainers of clients, like ChainSafe and Parity Technologies. Maybe some of it goes in like the Decred, if you guys are familiar with Decred, like a PR firm gets paid every month. Both Decred and Dash actually, the core development teams don't even know if they're going to get paid next month, technically, because they have to submit an invoice. Like the founders of the chain have to submit an invoice to the chain to get paid, right? So it's kind of this weird DAO-like company structure with the reoccurring revenue being the block reward. And I mentioned that for a couple of reasons. One is related to Polkadot and Kusama's long-term plan. So if Kusama does become a nested relay chain, how would that work, right? What that actually means in practice is KSM holders would have to be influenced to give up one of the utilities of the KSM token. So both Polkadot and KSM token, dot token and KSM have four uses. One is for bonding parachains, one is for interoperability fees, one is for staking, just like inflationary rewards. Related to the staking one, Kusama participants, if there's a shared security model, everything has to be secured by the same proof of stake, the same token, right? So in this world, potentially if the two were bridged, Polkadot could use some of its on-chain treasury, right, and buy KSM. This is kind of a weird thing, because protocols traditionally haven't been able to buy real-world assets or tokenized assets and custody them. But with Polkadot, that's entirely possible. Polkadot could buy KSM, Polkadot will probably buy Bitcoin, they'll probably buy gold-backed things, so unlike the dollar will be hopefully gold-backed at some point. So this is kind of a fully loaded relay chain. This is a relay chain, these are parent chains hanging off of it. I'm going to get into the structure of like these component pieces so that people kind of understand how Polkadot approaches scaling and how it approaches sharding. So these are the four different component pieces. In the picture before you have the relay chain, validator, parachain, collator, and block. So I'm going to get into each of these. Relay chain is really the, when you talk about like the Polkadot chain, you can kind of be talking about the relay chain. An outside entity thinks of Polkadot as one state machine, both the relay chain and the parachains, and thinks of it as kind of one, even though it's multiple blockchains under the hood, it really thinks of it as one entity, which is pretty powerful. But the relay chain is what facilitates transfers between message transfers between disparate parachains and bridge chains, and this is where the validators sit and secure the chain. So there's relay chain validators, and we expect there to be around 1,000 over the long term. Right now, Kusama has I think 160 or so, and it'll scale towards closer to 1,000. And we're pretty efficient with validators, so each shard or each parachain, it's like a 10-to-1 ratio. So about 10 validators per shard, and which is pretty competitive with say like Ethereum, which 2.0, which expects like 1,000 validators per shard, or Cosmos, which expects about 100 validators per zone. So we're pretty happy with that, and Joe will get into the consensus, the kind of hybrid consensus that makes that possible. So validators, as I mentioned, they stake dots, and then nominators, so if you don't want to run a validator node, nominators nominate them, pretty similar to other architectures, baking and Tezos, delegating and Cosmos. And then there's parachains, right? So I'll show a slide of the different teams. There's about 60 teams building substrate-based chains, which you could think of as kind of the main SDK for building chains on Polkadot, right? Polkadot kind of puts forth this new architecture where you can, it's not like you build smart contracts only, like Ethereum or EOS, but you have the option. You could build a runtime, you could build a blockchain, or you could build something on top of the blockchain, or maybe your application has a bit of logic on multiple parachains, right? That's kind of a new design space that we're really excited about. So parachains are, we expect there to be many different kinds. People are building supply chain parachains. Propolis is here tonight. They're building their own chain. For DeFi, there's going to be stablecoin parachains, Oracle parachains, and we hope that we see all these different chains interacting in a flurry of economic activity where the relay chain, as I mentioned in the previous slides, kind of facilitating interoperability and providing security to all of them. So that, right, it's kind of unclear why all of these new chains releasing have to worry about bootstrapping. Like, we talked to many different chains that are coming out, and they're like, how do you approach validators? I'm like, I wish you guys didn't have to worry about doing that, right? And that's what we're trying to solve with Polkadot. So parachain is going to get that. That guaranteed security. And we came out with a new product as well called Parathreads. So I mentioned there's kind of a relatively high dot cost for parachains, and these are kind of high throughput, because the difference between parachains and parathreads is mostly related to scheduling. So parachains, right, high throughput, up 24/7, just submit transactions. Parathreads, it's kind of pay as you go, so just like a smart contract on Ethereum, that you have to pay a little bit of gas to wake up the smart contract, you'd have to pay a little bit of DOT to wake up the parathread. So you could have like a dormant parachain that is running, but isn't necessarily accessing the relay chain every day for interoperability. So maybe doesn't have, you know, a couple thousand dots or whatever it is in the first parachain auction to get a slot on the relay chain to lease the shard. Collators, these are the nodes that sit, just like there's validators on the relay chain, there's collators on the parachain. So really what a parachain is it's two pieces. One is like a WebAssembly blob, and the other is the collator node. And we're finishing a toolkit called Cumulus over the next couple months that'll allow the first parachains to attach to the relay chain, which we haven't done yet on Kusama, even though it's live. So collators, they could stake tokens, they could be rewarded in dots, or the native parachain token. In the case it's like a smart contract parachain, right? And they want to have some utility for their token. Then they could incentivize inflationary rewards using their token as a collator, but you don't really have to. It's kind of up to the architecture of, or the design choices of that community and that market. This is just what one looks like combined. And then of course there's bridge chains. So we're working on there's teams working through the Web3 Foundation Grants program on bridges. And that's really exciting. So Bitcoin and Ethereum obviously will be some of the first ones after of course Kusama is bridged, and Zcash potentially as well. The main development team, Parity, who you'll hear from a little bit tonight, has a lot of experience building blockchains, and they've built implementations for some of these chains I just mentioned, including Zcash. So we're hoping we can reuse some of that work at some point. And then there's a lot more than 30 teams building on Substrate and Polkadot now, but here's some of them. Polymath is a really good example of like an enterprise-focused chain that really needs the security, really needs the future-proofness that Substrate provides. And I don't get too much into Substrate, but there's a lot of benefits why someone like Polymath or Chainlink that's really focused on enterprise and why they're building parachains. This is not Polkadot 22. This is Polkadot version 2. And it's just a different view of the same architecture. So in the world where there's a Kusama para relay chain, it would be right here. So you could think of like, there's going to be like 20 parachains per relay chain, or 100 parachains per relay chain. But what happens when they get full? Right? The scaling kind of stops. That's why we're hoping to eventually launch Polkadot version 2. You know, not anytime soon, probably like a year or 2 years. But this is what would be wherever like Kusama would sit here and have its own 100 parachains, and then you get 200 parachains, right? So we're pretty we're hopeful that not even before this, with just Polkadot's launch with parachains and that sharding architecture, that will 100x, 1000x throughput on Ethereum, and the problem will quickly become who's going to use these products, right? Who's going to use all of these things? Finding users for all the products that will eventually launch all these, these different composite chains. So kind of what I think of as like the nuts and bolts of Polkadot, or like minimum viable product Polkadot, is a relay chain with a Ethereum Bitcoin bridge, a smart contract parachain, a high throughput transaction like a DAG parachain, kind of for payments, and then like a Filecoin like parachain that you could kind of store your files on, and then lastly would be a DEX and an Oracle's parachain. So if you had those kind of infrastructure pieces, you could start to imagine cross-chain applications where a bit of logic is on each of those parachains. So say if you wanted to settle or to create like a decentralized insurance policy, so you'd maybe spin that up on Ethereum. You could get information about whether or not there was a flood or something that would trigger the insurance policy on an Oracle's parachain, that maybe like Chainlink or someone else would build. And that would be passed through the relay chain to the smart contract parachain, and if it needs to settle, maybe then it goes to the like a privacy coin or a stablecoin parachain to settle in that currency. So it's very similar to the composability on Ethereum today, right? Why is Ethereum's DeFi so why is it doing so well? It's because all of these different smart contracts are able to build on each other, right? It can be Xerox under the hood, settled in make or die, and then all packaged up in the derivatives contract on like Compound or something. So you get kind of these richer economic transactions once these can all build on each other. We're hoping to kind of take that one step further by introducing composability, not just on smart contracts in one smart contract chain, but across multiple chains, some of which could be smart contract chains. Okay, so where are we now? And then I'll get into some fun stuff around Kusama. So we're somewhere in here. We just launched the claim process on Monday, so if you're a DOT holder, you can claim your DOTs, which is really great. And that's kind of the first step towards releasing beta, which is going to be a proof of authority network, just like when we launched Kusama, where the validators are all run by Web3 Foundation, right? And then because of the way our on-chain governance works and the way we're able to upgrade the chain, there will be no hard forks, and we can slowly layer in features. So Polkadot beta maybe in like 30 to 60 days, which would be the proof of authority network, no transfers, no inflationary rewards, right, for Web3 Foundation during that period, and governance is controlled by Web3. And then once the chain's relatively stable, we'll open up limited functionality of the staking module, in addition to the claims module that already exists, where you can claim your dots. And the staking module will be limited because it'll just be setting an intention to be a validator and then nominating validators. And so this is kind of bootstrapping the initial validator community. Once there's 50, 100 validators, we'll issue a centralized runtime upgrade to transform the chain from a centralized proof of authority network to a decentralized proof of stake network. And at that point, once that's settled, Web3 Foundation will relinquish control of the super user control of the governance, and it'll be decentralized governance. And then at that point, probably the community would enable transfers to facilitate dot transfers. And that would be up to the community to put forward. And anyone can upgrade the setup, make a proposal. These are code level changes. And another thing that's really exciting that I'd like to highlight about Polkadot is it's not like a group of actors with admin rights to a repository get to decide if this chain makes this upgrade or does this relatively even illegal thing, right? This is a distributed group of stakeholders that are decentralized, making code level proposal changes, and if those are executed, those are binding. So if Polkadot decides to acquire, like I said, a bunch of DOT, there's no entity, Web3 Foundation or otherwise, that can buy a bunch of KSM with DOT to stop that, which is really powerful. That kind of, it really changes the view of hey, this is a brick of code called Bitcoin, a bunch of people maintain it, and a couple people have admin rights to, this is a living, breathing thing that is going to exercise its economic will in the real world and try to increasingly benefit the stakeholders of the chain, right? Because they have ultimate control over it. Okay, so then last things post Genesis, parachains layering to them. Those will be on Kusama first, as I mentioned earlier. Okay, so Kusama, what's going on with that? There's some weird stuff going on with Kusama. People are getting some bird tattoos, which is pretty funny. And they're getting paid by the Kusama on-chain treasury to do that. So why are they doing this? I guess it's like a society. So someone just put forward an idea that there would be a Kusama on-chain society, and it's the society gets all these benefits for having this tattoo. In addition, I think KSM you're paid to join the society. So this is 4YT7E. We don't know who it is. Everyone has their ideas. Yeah, you could join the society if you want. I think there's 3 members.
Yeah. There's 3.
Yeah. So maybe someone here could be the next member. I think I've heard rumors that they're gonna get some land out in Patagonia or something, and you can only get onto the an apocalypse scenario. You can only go there if you have the tattoo. Do you want to say anything about the $1,000 program?
Yeah, well, I work at Parity. I deal with a lot of things around validating, staking, that type of stuff. And basically, like, being a validator in the space is a very interesting topic, but it's also, actually being a validator is hard, partly just the barrier to entry. It has a lot of like economic concerns and whatnot. And this is kind of a way of actually kind of helping to lower the barrier of entry to becoming a validator. So in other networks, like Cosmos, you need like around $200,000 worth of atoms. Ethereum, you need like 32 knots to become a validator. Or 32 And right now, to be in the validator set for Kusama, you need about like 5,000 KSM, like total bonded. And it's kind of like not that easy to come by yourself if you're trying to do that. But that's kind of like your personal kind of bond, plus like all the people that nominate or like delegate to you in total. So this is a program where kind of people can sign up and get nominations from both Parity and Web3 to kind of cover that gap of costs to actually be in the validator set. So there's kind of just like some few rules around just kind of like upgrading on time, actually being kind of robust so that you don't get flashed and things like that. So I guess if you're interested in becoming a validator on Kusama, come talk to me afterwards and happy to chat about that. So,
Yeah, it's just another way we're incentivizing participation on Kusama. I mentioned on-chain treasury. So there's 112,000 KSM, I think they're trading like $1 in the on-chain treasury. And not enough, like everyone's proposals are rather humble. Just a couple KSM here and there, but if you wanted to like build a treasury like portal to view the treasury proposals better than Polkascan, which is great, but it's it's a block explorer. Then on-chain treasury can pay you. If you wanted to get the Virtuti, you could do that. If you wanted to throw meetups, you could. If you wanted to build a product, you could, and the protocol will pay you, which is cool. Other experimental things we have going on, so there's like a tipping mechanism that allows users to just for being a good Samaritan or whatever, to tip each other. And the council, there's a governing council on Polkadot that any address can join with enough votes. So they kind of approve that. There's a social recovery mechanism similar to Argent Wallet. There's a law and a module that kind of allows you to take out an insurance policy on your KSM. So there's all these different experiments going on around it, and that's really the hope of Kusama. There's going to be definitely more aggressive, even though Polkadot's technologically very aggressive, right? I mentioned how quickly it's moving and so forth, but even more experimental on Kusama. So it's still like trying to find its product market fit and its exact users, but we're having some early indications of what that looks like. So that's all from me. If I don't have my information here, but anyone can come talk to me after, or if any of you guys have questions now, I can. Yeah.
Can you go over the interoperating part again? It kind of flew over my head. What is it? The relay chain that's in charge of, like, how does the interoperability between the blockchains work?
Yeah, that's a great question. So, thinking of which slide is best to answer this. Maybe this one. So, the message passing is called XCMP, and it's essentially a coordination mechanism between the different parachains. So, imagine a transaction is generated here, and it's calling another parachain, an address of another parachain. You could think of it naively as the collators here. These are the nodes on the parachain. They take and bundle the transactions that are occurring here. They collate them. That's kind of the word, the why it's called collators, that are happening on the parachain. They submit a block. The collator, it just has to be one honest collator, but so just say it's one node here. It passes that proof of validity block to the,
This is like everything I want to talk about.
Okay, it's everything we're talking about. All right, it passes it to the validator, and then essentially they hash all of those together, and that's like the global state of the network. But Joe's going to explain it a ton better than I could.
One more thing.
Yeah.
When you're talking about the WASM, were you talking about with collators? Is that like how it's technologically made?
Joe, you go.
Okay, sorry.
It's good, all good. No, it's a great question. But yeah, not to be redundant with this talk. Part of it, yeah. Any other questions? Okay, sweet. Thanks for listening.